The US is in the news again, and this time, President Trump's immigration policies are hitting African communities in the US hard, or rather, creating economic ripples that is having immediate impacts on families back home. Deportation numbers climbed steadily through 2025, with immigration authorities targeting overstays and minor violations among work visa holders from the continent. African diaspora entrepreneurs who built small businesses like taxi services, hair salons, import shops now face sudden closure as key workers get removed. Remittances that flow back to families in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, those lifelines drop sharply when breadwinners lose status. The US employers in sectors like healthcare, transportation, tech support scramble to replace skilled workers with temporary protected status or pending green cards. African students on F1 visas see OPT extensions denied more often, forcing abrupt returns that cut off tuition dollars and future career paths. Community organizations report rising demand for legal aid, food assistance, as savings continue to dwindle. These policies expose vulnerabilities in a migration economic pipeline that sustained growth across African economies for decades. What starts as enforcement in one country triggers chain reactions. Family support networks weaken, local businesses abroad shrink, and investment flows in reverse. In this episode, we're breaking down how raids and policy shifts disrupt daily livelihoods, what replacement worker gaps mean for American industries, and why sending countries feel the biggest long-term pinch. You will hear from affected communities, see the numbers on lost income streams, and understand the full chain reaction. While headlines focus on border wars, the real story plays out in African-owned shops, closing doors, and wire transfers slowing to a trickle. Stay with us. This hits close to home for millions. Immigration raids picked up pace early 2025, focusing first on workplaces with high concentrations of African visa workers, like taxi companies, nursing homes, delivery services, which saw agents show up without much warning, checking papers on the spot. Drivers from East Africa, caregivers from West Africa, they all got detained right there on shifts, leaving schedules in chaos. Families split apart overnight. Kids in US schools suddenly without parents. Spouses left holding businesses together all alone. Community leaders organized emergency funds, but cash ran low very fast as legal fees piled up. Churches and mosques turned into meeting points, all for strategy sessions. Sharing tips on staying under the radar. And back in African countries, news spread quick through WhatsApp groups, warning about which US states cracked down the hardest. Families adjusted expectations, cutting back on school fees, medical bills that they counted on from abroad. This first wave set the pattern. Enforcement creates immediate household chaos that echoes thousands of miles away. And while communities absorbed these shocks, employers started filling the gaps, or I should say, the empty schedules that nobody could fill right away. Small business owners who relied on that reliable labor force now scramble for replacements. And that is where the biggest economic pictures started taking shape. The US companies dependent on African labor, like hospitals needing night shift nurses, construction crews, trucking firms hit roadblock fast. Managers posted urgent job ads, but local applicants didn't match the experience or availability. Training new hires took weeks, sometimes months. slowing down an entire operation. African-owned enterprises took the hardest hits. Restaurants serving jollof, braid salons, import stores selling fabrics and spices shuttered locations when their core staff got deported. Customers noticed that their favorite spots are gone, replaced by empty storefronts or closed for renovation signs that never changed. Landlords circled, waiting for rent checks to bounce. These closures rippled through supplier chains, and West African food distributors saw orders dry up. American wholesalers lost steady clients. Neighbors that thrived on that cultural economic mix felt quieter and less vibrant. For lack of a better word, entire mini economies just blinked out completely. And while these local businesses folded, real money flow, which is the remittances, keeping African families afloat, started drying up too, creating pressure points nobody saw coming from Washington. Wire transfers that paid for everything from university tuition to family farms dropped off sharply in mid-2025. Mothers in Lagos, Accra, Nairobi stretched monthly budgets as dollars stopped arriving in regular basis. Kids dropped out of private schools. Medical treatments got postponed. Small home businesses scaled back hours. Receiving banks in African capitals reported fewer transactions because smaller amounts and money transfer companies adjusted staffing. Closed branches in high migration towns, and government watched tax revenues from those incoming funds shrink, forcing cuts to public services. Diaspora associations shifted focus from celebrations to crisis mode. Fundraisers for legal battles, emergency grants for families on the edge, and social media filled with story. A nurse deported after 10 years. Her kids' school fees are now uncertain. A driver who struck payments defaulted. House foreclosed. These personal hits added up to national level strain. While families coped at home, the US industries kept struggling with labor gaps. But the story doesn't end there. African students watching their American dreams cut short brought another layer of fallout. African students on study visas faced OPT denials and status revocations at higher rates, packing up mid-degree or right after graduation. Universities lost tuition revenue from reliable international payers, cutting programs or raising fees on others. Campuses felt emptier. Research labs short-staffed. Those heading home brought skills but no work experience. They are all competing in already tight job markets. Parents who had borrowed heavily for US education faced debts without the expected payoff. Now, some students pivoted to Canada or Europe, but processing delays stranded thousands in limbo. OPT employers, tech firms, hospitals, they all scrambled for junior talents, delaying projects, losing competitive edge. And American classmates picked up the slack, but training curves slowed all the innovations. Now, this brain drain hit both sides. The US innovation pipelines clogged. African nations got returnees without networks. And while students adjusted plans, community safety nets started fraying under pressure, showing how deep these policies cut into everyday support systems. Churches, mosques, cultural centers that anchored African communities stretched resources thin, covering rents, groceries, legal consultations, food pantries emptied faster, clothing drives multiplied, leaders burned out, juggling day jobs with crisis counseling. Non-profit groups saw their donations dip as their own donors faced deportation threats. Government assistance are not left out because their programs overwhelmed in African heavy neighborhoods, Their wait lists grew. Kids qualified for school meals, but their parents hesitated, fearing scrutiny. Mental health took a hit. Stress, anxiety, all spiked as uncertainty ruled. Family counseling services booked solid. Community elders stepped in with traditional support. Now, these networks, built over decades, now tested to breaking points. While communities held together through grit, larger industries adapted unevenly. But wait till you see how sending countries started feeling long-term economic drag from all of this. Nations dependent diaspora dollars cut import plans, slowed infrastructure as foreign exchange dwindled. Real estate markets cooled where U.S. funds fueled construction booms. Banks tightened lending to remittance-reliant households. Governments launched job programs for returnees. But skills mismatches created friction. Youth unemployment ticked higher as reverse migration competed for spots. Trade balances shifted. Fewer dollars chasing imports meant local production. They all ramped up unevenly. Regional bodies discussed mitigation funds, but conditions lagged. Private sector adapted. Some firms hired returnees at discount rates. Others exported to fill the U.S. market gaps. Now, these adjustments showed resilience, but growth projections dipped. While African economics recalibrated, the U.S. policymakers weighed policy impacts against enforcement goals, bringing everything into sharper focus. Immigration authorities reported meeting deportation benchmarks, but businesses lobbied hard over labor. Shortages, trade groups, they all pushed for calf cuts. Temporary worker programs, political debates heated up, balancing security aims with economic realities. African governments sent diplomatic notes requesting visa fairness, and the U.S.-Africa Trade Summits addressed worker flows cautiously among community leaders. Now, they all testified sharing ground-level fallouts. Longer-term migration patterns shifted. More Africans eyed Europe, Gulf states, and innovation took hits from missing talent pipelines, sending countries that have built domestic skills and reducing reliance over time. This enforcement wave shaped lives, businesses, national budgets on both sides. African diaspora networks proved resilient, but scars linger in fractured families, shorter shops, slower growth. The accounting continues. President Trump's immigration crackdown creates immediate pain for African communities in the US, while sending shockwaves through economies back home. Small businesses close, families lose their main earners, and the money flow that built schools and homes across the continent slows to a trickle. American employers scramble for workers that they've come to rely on, and students cut short mid-degree. They bring their skills home too soon. These policies reveal the tight connections between migration and growth, disrupt one and the whole chain feels it. African diaspora shows resilience, adapting through community support and new pathways, but the human cost lingers in divided families and uncertain future. U.S. policymakers face real trade-offs between enforcement goals and economic needs. And African nations recalibrate, building domestic opportunities while watching migration patterns shift. What starts as border policy ends up reshaping livelihoods across continents. This is Frontline Africa. If you value truth unfiltered and power reframed from an African lens, please subscribe, like, and drop your thoughts in the comment section. And don't forget to turn on your notification bell if you want to continue seeing our contents. I remain your girl, Peace Solomon, and I'll see you in the next episode.